The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and expensive cologne. The city outside was alive with flashing lights and the distant hum of traffic, but in here, there was only him, his heat, his touch, his dominance. My breath hitched as his rough hands roamed my body, fingers tracing the curves he had already memorized. "You're playing a dangerous game, Olivia," he murmured, his lips ghosting over my ear. I smirked, tilting my head to expose more of my neck. "And you love it." He did. I could feel it in the way his fingers gripped my hips, in the way his body pressed me against the cool surface of the hotel room's window. The contrast of heat and cold sent a delicious shiver down my spine. He was holding back, but not for long. With a swift motion, he spun me around so that I was facing him. My back hit the window with a soft thud, and I gasped as his lips crashed against mine, hungry, desperate. His kiss was demanding, all-consuming, as if he wanted to devour me, to leave his mark on every inch of me. And I let him. "You like this, don't you?" he murmured against my lips, his hands sliding down my body, gripping, claiming. I let out a soft chuckle, teasing, taunting. "Make me like it more." A low growl rumbled from his chest, and then I was lifted off my feet, my legs wrapping around his waist instinctively. He carried me to the bed, dropping me onto the silky sheets before towering over me, his eyes dark with something primal. I reached up, running my fingers through his hair, pulling him down to me. "Show me how much you want me." He didn't need any more encouragement. His mouth was everywhere. My throat, my collarbone, the curve of my shoulder. His teeth grazed my skin, biting, marking. And I arched into him, relishing the sting. The fabric of my dress was pushed up, his fingers dancing along my thighs, spreading fire in their wake. Every touch was deliberate, teasing, designed to drive me insane. "Tell me what you want," he whispered, his breath hot against my skin. I met his gaze, my lips curling into a wicked smile. "I want you to ruin me." And he did. The night unfolded in a tangled mess of sheets, gasps, and whispered demands. He took his time, savoring every reaction, every sound I made, as if he wanted to burn this moment into his memory. And I let him. I let him push me to the edge and pull me back over and over, until I was nothing more than a trembling, breathless mess beneath him. But it wasn't just the pleasure that thrilled me. It was the danger. The knowledge that this, whatever this was forbidden. That if Nathan ever found out what I was doing, who I was doing it with, the consequences would be devastating. And that only made me crave it more. Nathan. The thought of my husband should have filled me with guilt. But instead, it sent a wicked thrill down my spine. He thought he had me wrapped around his finger. Thought our marriage was a picture-perfect facade. But he had no idea. No idea that I had been planning my revenge for years. No idea that I had already sunk my claws deep into the one person who could destroy him. I turned my head slightly, watching the man beside me as he lay on his back, chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. His features were sharp, handsome, too similar to Nathan's. But where Nathan carried himself with cold arrogance, he was different. He was the opposite of my husband, and yet they were bound by something neither of them knew. I reached out, tracing a finger along the curve of his jaw, down to the bruises I had left on his skin. He stirred slightly, his hand coming up to catch mine, pressing a kiss to my palm before he smirked lazily. "Still not satisfied?" he teased, voice thick with exhaustion. I chuckled, shifting closer, pressing my lips to his ear. "Never." His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me against him once more. We lost ourselves in the heat again, in the reckless hunger that neither of us could seem to escape. But this wasn't just about lust. Not for me. For me, this was a game, and I intended to win. As dawn began to break, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. I stood by the window, pulling the silk robe around my body, watching as the first rays of sunlight bathed the city in a golden glow. Nathan would be waking up soon. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages. One from my husband, checking in as expected. But it was the second message that made me smirk. "Unknown number. Did you get what you wanted?" I typed a reply, my fingers moving effortlessly over the screen. "Almost." I turned to look at the man still sleeping soundly in my bed. "Nathan, my dear." Oblivious husband had no idea that the man currently tangled in my sheets pressing his lips against my skin just hours ago, was the one person he could never forgive me for touching. His long-lost brother. And the best part? I had known all along. Morning light streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over the hotel room. I watched as the man beside me stirred, his muscles flexing under the crisp white sheets. His face was peaceful in sleep, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I let my fingers ghost over his bare shoulder, tracing the faint scars that marred his otherwise flawless skin. I had learned his body intimately over the past few months, memorized every ridge and hollow. But what fascinated me most was the fact that he had no idea who he truly was. No idea that the blood running through his veins was the same as Nathan's. That revelation had been my little secret. A delicious truth I had cradled close, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it like a bomb. And that moment was coming soon. "You're staring." His voice was thick with sleep, low and teasing. He cracked one eye open, smirking as he reached for me. I let him pull me down, his arms encircling my waist as his lips found my throat. "I like watching you when you sleep," I murmured, dragging my nails lightly down his spine. "You look so vulnerable." He chuckled, the sound vibrating against my skin. "I don't do vulnerable, sweetheart." I smiled against his temple, pressing a lingering kiss there. "Everyone has a weakness." His hands tightened around my hips, and suddenly I was beneath him, the weight of his body pressing me into the mattress. "Do I make you weak?" The arrogance in his tone was endearing. He truly thought he was the one in control. I slid my fingers into his hair, pulling just hard enough to make him groan. "You make me reckless," I whispered, arching against him. His mouth claimed mine in a slow, possessive kiss, as if he could brand himself into me with just his lips. His hands roamed, exploring territory he had already conquered but would never grow tired of. The heat between us ignited again, fierce and consuming. I let him take what he wanted. Let him believe that this was something real. Because that was the key to my game, letting them think they were in control. By the time we finally emerged from the sheets, the sun was high in the sky. I dressed lazily, taking my time smoothing the fabric of my dress over my hips as he watched me from the bed. His gaze was heated, lingering as if memorizing every detail. "You should stay longer," he murmured, stretching like a predator basking in the sun. I smiled, stepping closer to press a kiss to his lips. "Tempting. But I have a husband to go home to." His expression darkened slightly, a flicker of something possessive flashing across his features. "Right." I cupped his face, letting my thumb trace over his lips. "Don't look at me like that, Gabriel. You knew what this was." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Yeah, I know." But I could see it in his eyes. He was starting to want more. And that was dangerous. For him. I left him in that hotel room, stepping out into the bright afternoon with a satisfied smirk playing on my lips. The pieces were falling into place, just as I had planned. Nathan was waiting when I arrived home, his expression unreadable as he watched me step inside. He was already dressed in his tailored suit, his posture exuding quiet authority. "Busy morning?" he asked casually, sipping his coffee. I met his gaze unfazed. "Just some errands. You know how I am." His lips curled into something resembling a smile, but there was something in his eyes. Something calculating. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious. I walked past him, brushing my fingers over his shoulder as I did. "Are you coming to bed early tonight? I've missed you." Nathan watched me, his grip tightening around his coffee cup. "We'll see." I knew he wouldn't. He had been distant lately, too caught up in whatever was brewing in that sharp mind of his. But that was fine. Because so was I. I spent the afternoon in my private study, going through old photographs and documents I had collected over the years. The truth about Gabriel had been buried, hidden away like a shameful secret. Nathan's family had searched for their missing son for years. And yet, he had been right under their noses the entire time. Lost. Alone. Until I found him. I had carefully woven myself into his world, made him trust me, made him crave me. And now he was mine in a way he had never been anyone else's. It was almost poetic. That the man I had spent years destroying was about to be brought to his knees by the one person He would never be able to forgive himself for hurting. As evening fell, I received a message. Gabriel, I want to see you tonight. I smirked, fingers tapping against my phone screen as I considered my response. Olivia, impatient aren't we? Gabriel, can you blame me? No, I couldn't. I was addictive. And he was already too far gone to stop. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, tilting my head slightly. My lips were still swollen from his kisses, my skin marked by his touch. Nathan wouldn't notice. And even if he did, it was too late. Because by the time he realized the extent of my betrayal, by the time he put the final pieces together, I would have already won. I picked up my phone, finally typing out my response. Olivia, midnight. Same place. As soon as the message was sent, I turned off my phone and tucked it away. The game was reaching its climax, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Midnight. I stepped into the dimly lit hotel suite, the familiar scent of expensive cologne and sex still lingering in the air. Gabriel was already waiting, leaning against the edge of the bed. His shirt unbuttoned just enough to hint at the body I had spent hours worshipping. His eyes darkened when he saw me. You're late, he murmured, pushing off the bed and closing the distance between us. I smirked, letting him grab my waist, his fingers already tugging at the zipper of my dress. I had to make sure my husband was asleep. The mention of Nathan made his grip falter for the briefest second. It was always like this. He hated being reminded of my marriage. I tilted my head, my fingers trailing up his chest. Does it bother you? His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he spun me around, pressing me against the cool surface of the hotel mirror. I don't care about him, he muttered, his breath hot against my neck. I only care about this. I smiled, satisfaction curling through me as he kissed me, rough and desperate. He wanted to believe that this was just sex, that what we had was separate from the rest of the world. But I knew better. And soon he would too. We spent hours tangled together, lost in the heat of each other's bodies. When it was over, Gabriel lay beside me, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my stomach. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Then finally he broke it. I want more, he admitted, his voice low, almost hesitant. I don't want to keep meeting you like this. I turned my head to look at him, feigning confusion. What do you mean? His blue eyes burned into mine. I want you to leave him. Ah, there it was. The inevitable moment when the pawn started believing he could become a player. I let out a soft sigh, rolling onto my side to face him fully. Gabriel, we've talked about this. His jaw clenched. No, you've talked about this. You keep telling me this is just an affair, that it doesn't mean anything. But I see the way you look at me. Do you? I murmured, trailing my fingers down his chest. He caught my wrist before I could go lower. Olivia, I'm serious. I tilted my head, studying him. He looked conflicted, restless. Perfect. I sighed dramatically, slipping out of bed and reaching for the silk robe draped over the chair. You know it's not that simple. He sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. Make it simple. Tell him the truth. Tell him you don't love him anymore. I turned back to him with a slow, knowing smile. And what would you do if I did? He blinked, thrown off by my question. What? I stepped closer, pressing my palm against his chest. If I told Nathan I was leaving him for you, what do you think would happen? Gabriel frowned, confusion flickering in his gaze. He'd be pissed, but he'd get over it. I laughed softly. Would he? His confusion deepened. What are you trying to say? I traced the scar on his shoulder, the one he didn't remember getting. You don't know him like I do. You don't know what he's capable of when someone betrays him. Gabriel scoffed. You're making him sound like some kind of monster. I smiled, tilting my head. Aren't we all? He stared at me, his brows furrowed. For the first time since we started this affair, I saw something other than blind desire in his eyes. Doubt. Good. I leaned in, pressing a lingering kiss to his lips. Go to sleep, Gabriel. We'll talk about this later. I left him there, staring after me as I slipped into the bathroom. I closed the door behind me, letting out a slow exhale. He was starting to question things, which meant it was almost time. I pulled out my phone, unlocking it with a swipe of my finger. A single new message waited for me. "Nathan, we need to talk." I stared at the text, my pulse quickening. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. I typed out a quick response. "Olivia, of course, darling. Breakfast. Nathan, dinner. I'll pick you up at 7. So, he wanted time to prepare. Interesting. I placed my phone on the counter, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My lips were swollen, my skin still marked by Gabriel's hands. Nathan would notice. And that was exactly what I wanted. That evening, Nathan arrived right on time. He looked as put together as ever, his suit crisp, his demeanor calm. But I saw the tension in his shoulders. The way his fingers flexed at his sides. He was barely holding it together. Good. We drove in silence to an upscale restaurant, one of those places where people whispered over candlelit tables, pretending their lives were perfect. Nathan ordered a bottle of wine, pouring us both a glass before finally speaking. "I followed you last night." I didn't flinch, didn't react at all. I simply took a sip of my wine, letting the weight of his words settle between us. "And?" I prompted, meeting his gaze. His jaw tightened. "And I saw you." A slow smile curled my lips. "Did you enjoy the show?" His fingers clenched around his glass, knuckles turning white. "Is this a game to you, Olivia?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Isn't marriage always a game?" His eyes darkened. "Who is he?" I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way his patience began to fray. Then finally I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" Nathan frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "You've been looking for him for years, haven't you?" I murmured. "Your long-lost brother." His breath hitched. I smiled. "I found him first." Nathan's entire body went still. His fingers slackened around his glass, his lips parting slightly as realization sank in. For the first time since I met him, he looked truly shaken. I leaned back, sipping my wine. And just like that, the game had officially begun. The silence between us stretched unbearably long. Nathan's face was frozen, his usually sharp, calculating eyes clouded with something I rarely saw in him, disbelief. "You're lying," he finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. I smirked, swirling the wine in my glass. "Am I?" His grip tightened around the stem of his glass, and for a second, I thought he might shatter it. He was unraveling, just as I had intended. "Nathan," I murmured, leaning in. "You're one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. Surely, you've considered the possibility that he was out there all along. That maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lost, just hidden." His breathing was heavier now, his pupils dilated. He wasn't just angry. He was terrified. "You." He swallowed hard. "You knew who he was, and you fucked him?" I finished, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, darling. Over and over again. And you know what's even better? He thinks he loves me." Nathan's fist slammed onto the table so suddenly that the cutlery rattled. A few heads turned our way, but I didn't flinch. If anything, I was enjoying this. "You're sick," he hissed. I leaned back in my chair, smiling sweetly. "Am I? Or am I just giving you what you deserve?" His jaw tensed, his breathing harsh. "You're playing a dangerous game, Olivia." I tilted my head. "No. My love, I've already won." Nathan didn't speak a word on the way home. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw locked so tightly I thought it might crack. The air inside the car was suffocating, thick with unspoken words, unbridled fury, and something else, something I recognized far too well. Fear. I turned to look at him, tracing the sharp lines of his profile with my gaze. "You're quiet," I mused. His fingers twitched against the leather of the steering wheel. "What do you want from me?" I sighed, stretching out in my seat like a satisfied cat. "Want?" I echoed. "I already have everything I want, Nathan. I have you. I have him. And soon." I turned my head to look out the window, watching the lights blur past. "I'll have nothing left to lose." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "What the hell does that mean?" I smiled, but I didn't answer. Let him stew in his own paranoia. When we got home, Nathan went straight to his office, slamming the door behind him. I let out a soft chuckle. He was breaking piece by piece. And that was exactly what I needed. I poured myself a glass of scotch, relishing the slow burn as it slid down my throat. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. Gabriel, I need to see you. I smirked. He was getting desperate. Perfect. I grabbed my coat and slipped out of the house, knowing full well Nathan wouldn't come after me. Not yet. He needed time to process everything, which meant I had time to finish what I started. Gabriel was waiting for me in his apartment, pacing like a caged animal. The moment I stepped inside, he grabbed me by the waist, his grip almost bruising. You told him, he accused, his voice hoarse. I smiled, trailing a finger down his chest. Of course I did. He sucked in a sharp breath. Why? Because, I whispered, standing on my toes to brush my lips against his ear. I wanted to see what he'd do. Gabriel shuddered, his grip tightening. He's going to kill me. I chuckled. He won't. Not yet anyway. Gabriel pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. His expression was torn, desperate. Olivia, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I felt a flicker of irritation, but I quickly masked it. Too late for that, I murmured, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to his lips. He groaned, his hand sliding up my back. He still wanted me, and as long as he did, he was still mine. We barely made it to the bedroom. Clothes were torn, hands were desperate, and by the time we hit the mattress we were both gasping. Gabriel moved with a kind of hunger that almost felt violent, his grip leaving bruises, his breath ragged against my skin. You drive me fucking insane, he growled, his teeth scraping against my collarbone. I arched beneath him, my nails digging into his back. Then lose your mind for me. And he did. Later, as we lay tangled together, Gabriel finally spoke. We should leave. I frowned, turning to look at him. What? He sat up, running a hand through his hair. You and me. We should leave the city. Go somewhere else. Somewhere he can't find us. I stared at him, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. He was serious. He thought this was real. How tragic. I reached out, cupping his cheek. Oh, Gabriel. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes for a brief moment. I love you, he murmured. I felt nothing, but I smiled anyway, leaning in to kiss him softly. I know. And that was the problem. Because love made people reckless. And I wasn't done playing yet. I slipped out of bed while Gabriel slept, my heart pounding with a strange mix of excitement and something close to regret. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number I had memorized by heart. Nathan answered on the first ring. Where are you? His voice was low, dangerous. I smiled. With him. Silence. Then a slow exhale. You're pushing me, Olivia. That's the point, darling. Nathan chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You think you've won? I tilted my head, watching Gabriel's sleeping form. Haven't I? Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. Not yet. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to uncertainty. Nathan wasn't broken. Not yet. But he was close. And that meant I had to end this soon. Before he found a way to end me first. The city lights stretched endlessly below as I stood on Gabriel's balcony, the cold night air biting at my skin. The weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on my chest. Everything was unraveling, faster than I had anticipated. Behind me, Gabriel stirred in bed. I turned slightly, watching as he shifted under the covers, his body half exposed. There was something almost innocent about the way he slept, his brows slightly furrowed as if he were lost in a dream. He wanted to run away with me. How naive. Gabriel loved me. And I needed him to believe that I loved him too. But love had never been a part of the equation for me. It never could be. My phone buzzed in my hand. A single message from Nathan. Come home. Now. A thrill ran through me. He was losing control. I could feel it. I turned back into the room, slipping into my dress with slow, deliberate movements. Gabriel shifted again, his eyes fluttering open. Where are you going? His voice was thick with sleep. I walked over to him, pressing a kiss to his temple. I just need to take care of something. He caught my wrist before I could pull away. His grip firm. Stay. I hesitated just for a second. I can't. Gabriel sat up, his eyes searching mine. He's dangerous, Olivia. I smiled, running a finger down his chest. So am I. And with that I left. Nathan was waiting when I arrived, standing in the dimly lit living room with a glass of whiskey in hand. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly wrinkled, signs of a man coming undone. You took your time, he murmured, swirling the amber liquid. I shrugged, stepping closer. I wanted to see how desperate you'd get. Nathan chuckled, but there was no amusement in it. He set his glass down, his eyes locking onto mine. Do you think this is a fucking game, Olivia? I smirked. Of course it is. And I'm winning. His jaw clenched, and in an instant he was on me, his hands gripping my wrists as he pushed me against the wall. The air between us was thick with something electric. Rage, lust, hatred. You think I don't know what you're doing? He growled, his breath hot against my skin. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Enlighten me. His grip tightened. You wanted me to find out about him. You wanted me to break. But here's the thing, darling. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. You underestimated me. A shiver ran through me. Excitement. Nathan pulled back, his eyes burning into mine. You destroyed my family, he murmured. You tore us apart. I smiled. Good. His hand closed around my throat, his grip just tight enough to make my pulse quicken. You should be afraid of me, Olivia. I laughed, my fingers trailing up his arm. I don't fear you, Nathan. I made you. Something dark flickered across his expression, and then he kissed me. Hard. Punishing. It was a war. A battle of dominance neither of us wanted to lose. We didn't make it to the bedroom. The living room became our battlefield, bodies colliding, clothes torn away in a frenzy of anger and desire. This was what we were. Two people bound by destruction, feeding off each other's ruin. When it was over, we lay in the aftermath, our breaths heavy, our bodies tangled. Nathan stared at the ceiling, his expression unreadable. You really hate me that much? He finally asked. I traced a lazy circle on his chest.
No, Nathan.
If I hated you, this would have been too easy. His hand closed over mine, his grip firm. Then why? I sighed, rolling onto my side to face him. Because your family took everything from me. My father. My mother. My life. And now. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. I'm taking everything from you. Nathan exhaled sharply. Gabriel isn't a part of this. I smiled, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Oh, but he is. Nathan's eyes darkened. You think he'll forgive you when he finds out the truth? I laughed softly. He doesn't have to. Nathan's grip on me tightened. You don't get to win this time, Olivia. I leaned in, my lips ghosting over his. I already have. The next morning, Gabriel was waiting outside my apartment. His expression was twisted with something close to panic. You went back to him, he accused, his hands clenching at his sides. I sighed, stepping closer. Gabriel. Don't, he snapped. Just tell me the truth. I tilted my head. Which truth do you want? The one where I love you? Or the one where I used you? His face paled. You're lying. I smiled, reaching up to cup his cheek. Am I? Gabriel's breath hitched, his hands gripping my arms. Tell me you never loved me, he whispered. I hesitated. For the first time since this game began, I hesitated. And that was my mistake. Gabriel's eyes filled with something heartbreaking. You did, he breathed. Even for just a second. I swallowed hard. It doesn't matter. It does to me, he murmured. I pulled away, shaking my head.
No, Gabriel.
What matters is that you were never supposed to be a part of this. He exhaled sharply. But I was. And now. He took a step back, his jaw tightening. I can't let you win. I laughed, but it was hollow. You don't have a choice. Gabriel's gaze hardened. Yes, I do. And then he walked away. Days passed. Weeks. Nathan didn't contact me. Neither did Gabriel. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alone. I had won. The family that destroyed mine was in shambles. So why did it feel so fucking empty? One night, as I sat in the dark, my phone rang. Nathan. I answered, my voice steady. Miss me already? Silence. Then, you should leave the city, Olivia. I frowned. Why? Nathan exhaled. Because I don't lose. My blood turned cold. And then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse thundering in my ears. This wasn't over. Not yet. But as I sat there, alone in the darkness, for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure if I had won at all.